We are now moving into the influencing and framing factors. This will begin the beginning phase of negotiations. So, when we look at negotiation overall, we can really look at it in three phases: a beginning, a middle, and an end. In the beginning, we have really our influencing and framing factors that allow us the initial lenses through which we are moving into this negotiation. So, as we look at deconstructing conflict, influencing factors and framing factors can be further filtered out. So when we look at influencing factors, we're really looking at what is the situation, how are the worldview and cultures and our feelings impacting how we are viewing the particular conflict at hand. Framing factors allow us to look at position and needs, and then coming up with a reframing, which allows for us to build that bridge that meets the needs of both parties. But in order for us to even get to the reframe, we must move beyond the position. So, as we start to dive deeper into what is the situation in the worldview, here are some particular questions that will allow us to begin to engage us in the critical reflection that we need to begin to identify particular lenses, biases, stereotypes, and what frames are we approaching the particular negotiation that we are about to go into. So, first, I want to kind of just define identity frames. Drawing from the larger body of general research on conflict framing, the concept of identity frames illustrates the various ways in which people view themselves in the context of specific conflicts. It also allows us to think about how individuals who are part of a larger group are influenced by their affiliations with and participation in that group. So why are frames so important? And this will become something that we will really focus really throughout the entire class is on framing and reframing. So a frame is an interpretive device that all people use when making sense of the world around them. Because the task of processing information about our social world is difficult, complex, and often cumbersome, especially when addressing social conflicts. We must use devices that help us make better sense of any given situation. All individuals use frames to aid in deciding where and how we fit into a conflict and what, if anything, we can do as a response. Using the metaphor of a picture frame, the concept of frame acts as a device to draw borders around what is and is not important. Just as a picture frame defines what is and what is not included in a picture, conflict frames define what is and is not important to consider when faced with the conflict. The importance of identity frames. The concept of identity frames is an important one because it allows us to analyze how individuals' identity and group affiliations influence how they view and respond to conflict. Because identity describes who we are as a person, we tend to protect those things, beliefs, values, groups affiliations that help create our sense of self. When individuals' identities are threatened or challenged through conflict, they respond in ways that reinforce their allegiance to these affiliations. In a nutshell, identity frames crop information and perspectives that do not align with or perhaps contradict features of an individual's core identity. So, where do these frames come from? Identity frames are created in a number of ways and are influenced by multiple factors. Individuals' understanding of their core beliefs, values, and sense of self influences how they respond in a conflict. Often people see themselves as an advocate of a particular set of values, whether it be environmentalism, conservation, freedom, equality, and frame the conflict based on how the alternatives advance one or more of a particular set of interests. The first is group identification. The groups of which individuals are a part of also influence their orientation towards the conflict and towards other parties involved. For example, when deciding whether to support new legislation calling for prayer in public schools, one's identity as a fundamentalist Christian would result in a more favorable frame towards the policy. One would likely frame the conflict through the values of one's church community rather than through the values of personal choice or preference. This framing in turn influences how the individual will consider the merits of opposing arguments and positions on the conflict. When people view themselves as part of a larger group, position, institution, or set of values, they will behave in ways that protect these markers of identity. We also have social and institutional roles. One's role in society, whether it be a student, a parent, a friend, activist, victim, guardian, relative, boss, or employee, can dramatically influence one's identity frames. In turn, each of these societal roles can influence the options we see available. For example, when considering options for moving the boundaries of school attendance areas, thus changing which school particular children would go to. The way we frame the ensuing dispute depends on our particular social and institutional role. As a parent, people may view the dispute in terms of how the outcome would affect their children or perhaps their ability to parent. Parents generally do not want their children to be forced to move unless they are being moved into a better school. School administrators may be more interested in how the outcome would affect teachers or the overall budget of the school system. As an employee, people may be more interested in how this relocation would affect their employment status. Based on our different roles, we will see and respond to frame the dispute differently based on the needs and interests of our particular role. Role conflict may occur when two of our roles clash, perhaps our role as a parent and administrator. Our institutional affiliation, whether that be a rancher, federal employee, a representative, mayor, president of a particular organization, director of an environmental organization, may also facilitate or inhibit particular ways of looking at a conflict. For example, as a politician, we may evaluate first and foremost how the outcome of a particular dispute, or even the processes we use to address the conflict, may influence our ability to be reelected. In this case, the politician would make choices based on a frame that considers only those behaviors that make good politics. A sound solution may not be considered because the politician frame did not allow that option to come into view. Ethnic, racial, and cultural identity. Individuals' identity frames are also strongly influenced by their affiliation with a particular ethnic group, whether that be Polish, Irish, African, Peruvian, racial backgrounds such as Hispanic, African American, Asian American, place, whether that be the South, the Midwest, Flowing Gardens, LA, Texas, South America, or particular cultural and subcultural groups, whether that be retired, lawyer, elderly, disabled. Members of a particular cultural identity group are likely to operate from a frame that evaluates how a particular conflict will affect members of the larger group. In one case, featuring a dispute over a neighborhood development, different cultural groups may frame the same problem in drastically different ways. For example, a proposed development requires tearing down an old blues club to build a new set of apartments that includes a medical facility for the elderly. Certain African American groups and local musician guilds are upset that their only form of entertainment in the community will be lost. However, the elderly population sees the conflict through a frame that considers the significant expansion of health services in the neighborhood. Still, other older members of the Polish community are concerned that the new buildings conform to the old world architectural style of the surrounding buildings. Based on the interests and needs of the larger cultural identity group, rather than on solely individual beliefs, their members are likely to use a frame that prioritizes examining the effects of the conflict on their specific group.